Part 34. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 343. Kill him, and whatever you ask for will be taken care of by me. The steward is obviously really annoyed this time. Is opening a black boxing ring just for excitement? No, it's for money, silver, and knives. After losing so many games, the compensation was real money. If he continues to lose, he doesn't need Zhao Ting to deal with him, and the big boss behind him will kill him. You sure? Wang Zheng looked sideways at the steward. I'm sure, the steward said, patting his chest. Okay, Wang Zheng nodded and walked onto the stage with a sinister expression. He looked at Su Tong carefully and sighed, I don't want to kill anyone, but I'm sorry. Su Tong nodded with his mask on, but his eyes were looking at the thick blood cloud above Wang Zheng's head. The strange fate made him unpredictable. Kill him. Don't be nagging, the steward urged. Wang Zheng took a deep breath, opened his arms, and spread his arms high. The strange shape made everyone around him speechless. Mr. Li even held a paper fan to his forehead. He had never seen anyone open his door to others like this. This was not seeking death. However, Su Tong had a different kind of feeling. Although Wang Zheng was not moving, with the help of Kimin, he could feel the strange resonance between the surrounding earth and Wang Zheng himself, as if Wang Zheng at this time was more like a mountain standing there. Even the blood cloud above Wang Zheng's head became thicker and thicker, as if something was about to come out of the blood cloud. He even had a strong hunch that as long as he killed him, he might be the one who died. Hit. The surrounding audience was already red-eyed. They had placed heavy bets on Su Tong. If they lost, they would lose everything. Su Tong finally moved, his steps slowly increased, his hands like fists, directly hitting the chest of the player in front of him. However, at the same time that his fist fell on the opponent's chest, Su Tong suddenly took his fist back, grinned at the man in front of him, and his fist suddenly slowed down. This scene was something no one expected. Even Wang Zheng's eyes widened, and he was stunned for a few seconds before suddenly looking at Su Tong in surprise. Even a layman could tell that this punch was obviously weak, slow, and clumsy, and even a child could dodge it. Isn't this a joke? Fake match? This is a fake match. The people below were furious in an instant, and the manager opened his mouth and cursed, your mother's fake match, only the winner is determined in the ring. The steward doesn't know what Zhao Ting is thinking now, but he doesn't care. Only by winning the money back can he have a chance to survive. However, no one noticed that Wang Zheng's eyes at this moment were extremely complicated. First he was confused, then entangled, and finally he seemed to have made some determination. He straightened his chest, and kicked his legs as if he had taken the initiative to bump into him. Lying down and jumping out of the ring. After falling to the ground, he hugged his chest and wailed. That acting, ugh, Su Tong curled his lips, 0 points. Now everyone was dumbfounded. Can you not be stupid? Others are fixing matches, but they are fighting to the death. When these two are fixing matches, it feels like they are rubbing their heads on the floor. Obviously they couldn't accept the WWE version of their performance. Just when they were about to curse, someone suddenly remembered, no, it doesn't matter whether they were fake or not, I won. Suddenly he was shouting curses that reached his throat, he swallowed them back, picked up the gambling tickets in his hand and rushed out, you win, give me the money. The steward was even more shocked and rushed to Wang Zheng like a madman. He pounced on Wang Zheng like a hungry wild dog and grabbed his collar with both hands. Are you crazy or sick? Wang Zheng looked at the steward in front of him who was so angry that he lost his mind. He wiped the saliva from his face helplessly, leaned to one side, and said angrily, I don't want to either, but he gave too much. This guy is just an ordinary steward. He can't help you much, but I can. The 400 script points are a deposit. Come to Nanhongshun tonight and I can give you more. If you don't accept it, just pretend I didn't say anything. If you say this, I will turn around and leave, and you can't stop me. These were the exact words Su Tong gave him. Although Wang Zhenggren looked a little nervous, he was not stupid. He gave him 400 script points casually, and it was just a deposit. It looked like he was a rich man. In comparison, this manager is nothing. At worst, I don't have to do the side mission. With 400 script points I can still make a lot of money. You bastard, you were raised by a girl to play with. The steward was about to vomit blood because of his anger, so he hammered Wang Zheng with both hands, but Wang Zheng just curled up and remained motionless, hitting and scolding him as he pleased. Anyway, I am dead now and cannot move. Steward, there are so many people coming to exchange money, we can't exchange it. The waiter ran over with a pale face and said, after hearing this, the manager didn't even bother to settle the score with Wang Zheng, and called to the nursing staff, hit me, beat me out, this is a fake match, it can't count. At this point, he could only refuse to pay, but as soon as he finished speaking, he heard a sneer, you haven't had enough fun with the fake match. When the steward looked up, he saw Su Tong lying beside the ring and teasing him. Although it is a fake match, the task does not require you to work hard, as long as you win. After 5 boxing matches, his proficiency in the 5 birds grappling hands has also improved a lot, and there is only a small gap between him and the LV2 level. What was more important was not the completion of the side mission, but Su Tong's discovery of an interesting guy. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but look at the person lying on the ground. You. Zhao Ting, I'm going to kill your whole family, the steward was already furious. He called the thugs around him and rushed forward. However, Su Tong was not Wang Zheng. He raised his hand, and a cold pistol appeared in his hand. He pointed it at the steward's head and pulled the trigger. Bang, with the burst of fire from the muzzle of the gun, a hole as big as a thumb appeared in the steward's head. This gunshot also made the chaotic scene quiet down. Su Tong pointed his gun at the thugs. The thugs holding sticks were instantly intimidated. As soon as they lost the sticks in their hands, they ran faster than rabbits. Seeing this, Su Tong grinned, put away his gun, jumped off the ring, glanced at Wang Zheng, who was lying on the ground pretending to be dead, and said, remember to come to Nanhongshun, I'll wait for you there. Wang Zheng hummed, turned over, buried his head under his elbows and continued to pretend to be dead. Without the thugs, the spectators who won the money became even more crazy. The scene instantly turned into a mess. Xiang Keting and the other 3 left immediately when they saw this. They didn't care about money, and spending a few hundred taels of silver was nothing to them. Not a big deal. As soon as the 3 of them walked out of the viewing area, Xiang Keting looked back and saw Ma Hongwen walking out with his pants lifted. He patted his thigh and quickly pulled him away. Brother Ma, you are really a living god. You missed all the fun when you were soaked in shit. The 4 people walked out of the alley, and Xiang Keting started to complain. Su Tong waved his hand with a pale face, his eyebrows almost twisted into a ball. No, I must have eaten bad at noon, and my stomach is still churning now. You go back first, and I won't accompany you. Another day, I'll invite everyone to Hungbin Tower for dinner. Seeing his appearance, the 3 of them became worried. Moreover, the black boxing ring was a mess and there would inevitably be some trouble later. So the 3 of them stopped trying to stay and hurriedly said goodbye to Su Tong before leaving quickly. Seeing the 3 of them walking away, Su Tong slowly stood up straight, grinned, turned around and walked in the direction of Nanhongshun. As soon as the 4 people left, they saw people from the patrol camp arriving after a while. The new commander-in-chief was still holding the cigarette stick of fuchsia ointment in his hand, and he rushed into the alley with his men, Bold, you are a private gangster, everyone will get the stolen goods, arrest them all, take them back and interrogate them one by one. Now, no matter whether they were spectators or people in the black boxing ring, every one of them was taken away by the officers and soldiers. At night, in Prince Gong's mansion, the lights are dim, and it is brighter at night than during the day. There are a total of 12 Iron Hat Kings in the Daetong dynasty, which are passed down from generation to generation. As long as this line is not broken, they will always be the princes. Now all the court ministers were standing in a circle in the courtyard. Looking at the bird in Prince Gong's hand, they all praised it and praised the lark in Prince Gong's hand. Prince Gong had a bright smile on his face and looked very happy. He spent a lot of money to buy this bird. Even the cage was made of gold wire. Your Majesty, the governor needs money again. It's very difficult for us at the Ministry of Household Affairs to do it. He asked for 600,000 taels of silver to purchase military supplies. Now there is a severe drought in Hebei and floods in Henan. We only have that little money on hand. It's difficult. The Minister of Household Affairs said with a bitter look on his face. Several other ministers on the side had no good words. They suspected that the Xiang family was falsely reporting military pay. In the past, 300,000 taels were enough to purchase military supplies, but now they have to double it as soon as they open the door. Haha, 600,000 taels is indeed too much, but the Xiang family has been recruiting troops recently. Let's make a compromise and give 400,000 taels. It's not easy for the court now, and there are only 200,000 taels left. Yinzi, please come together, the Queen Mother has been in a bad mood recently, and I heard that she wants to watch the fireworks during the Chinese New Year, so your household department can make preparations. Yes, yes, yes. Everyone nodded. At this time, a servant came over. After speaking in the ear of the housekeeper from a distance, the housekeeper's face was uncertain for a moment and he walked carefully to Prince Gong. Seeing this, these ministers also resigned in a sensible manner. After everyone left, the housekeeper said, Your Majesty, our newly opened black boxing stadium is gone. Prince Gong seemed not to have heard anything. He looked at the lark in his hand and gently stroked its feathers with his fingers. It's gone, it's gone. Just open a new casino and the money will come back. The butler looked a little embarrassed. Well, the money is gone. I don't know what happened. I lost several games in a row. I lost more than 400,000 silver. I lost all my money. The patrol camp arrested some people, but the background of these people it was quite big, so they didn't dare to move, so they let it go, and the rest, all ran away. Prince Gong's hand on the lark paused slightly, and he looked sideways at the housekeeper. When he twisted his fingers, he heard a scream from the lark on his hand, and it was crushed to death. He threw it to the ground casually. Go and chase back the ministers who just left, and tell them that the Xiang family's military pay is too much, and we will reduce it by another 200,000 taels. After saying that, he threw Bai Ling on the ground, turned around and walked into the room with a dark face. The housekeeper glanced at the deformed lark on the ground, smashed it, and ordered his servants to bury the bird. He sighed with regret. Hey, a 10,000 tael lark is just gone. Such a pity. Infinite script killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 344. Kinmen Street Nanhong Shun. This is also a time-honored mutton restaurant in Beijing. Shabu shabu mutton is their signature dish. Since then, the mutton shabu shabu has become a signature, but don't tell me, the mutton shabu shabu here is different. In reality, it is usually cut by machine, but now it is hand-cut mutton. Whether it tastes good or not depends entirely on the hands of the master. The so-called clear soup, copper pot, high-carbon stove, sesame sauce, sugar garlic, and fresh mutton. There are still many sayings about mutton shabu shabu. 1 is the stew, 2 is the stew, and the other is the stew. Therefore, the mutton should not be too thick. If it is too thick, it will still be raw if you rinse it. If it is too thin, it will be gone if you rinse it. This is a test of the chef's knife skills. Only with good knife skills, the cut meat will be cooked as soon as it is brushed in the pot, so that the human body can experience the soft and crispy texture of the mutton itself, paired with the sesame sauce prepared by yourself. That is the most coveted delicacy among young and old men in the capital during autumn and winter. This way. Su Tong had been waiting here for a long time. When he saw Gao Zhou walking upstairs, he waved to him. Gao Zhou was not polite and sat down to eat. It was obvious that he had suffered a lot in the martial arts gym during this period. After eating a large plate of meat to fill the bottom, Gao Zhou started to curse, "Hey, mother, these bastards are really nothing. I almost jumped up and gave these bastards 2 chestnut shells." Gao Zhou was obviously really furious, and even spoke in dialect this time. It turns out that his identity is as an apprentice in a martial arts school. Not only does he have to do handyman, but he is also often bullied. If the prop book hadn't reminded him that this was his main mission, he would have slaughtered all these bastards and turned them all into zombies. "So you already have the main mission?" Su Tong was surprised. He had just completed 2 side tasks, but he still had no clue about the main task. Gao Zhou nodded, and then looked at Su Tong doubtfully. "Why, you haven't received the main mission yet?" "No, but I think it will be soon." Su Tong picked up the chopsticks, scooped a piece of mutton and put it in his mouth. He couldn't help but think about the fact that he was about to go to Kintian prison to serve. He gave the script to Gao Zhou to look through. In fact, the script only had a general direction, but did not explain any plot details. Of course, it did not include Gao Zhou's martial arts gym. However, his identity mission was regarded as the main mission, indicating that the martial arts gym itself should contain some major clues. Su Tong suggested that Gao Zhou use his identity to investigate the martial arts gym first. Gao Zhou looked depressed, especially when he learned Su Tong's identity. His eyes almost glowed green, and his face was filled with envy, jealousy, and hatred. "Why should I eat yellow-faced steamed buns? You eat a lot of fish and meat every day." At this point, Su Tong didn't have the nerve to tell him that his home was always equipped with a bed warmer, for fear that Gao Zhou would not be able to enjoy the meal after he found out. After the two of them said a few words, another person came up from downstairs. Su Tong took a look and quickly waved, "Here." Gao Zhou looked back and saw that the person was so big. He felt that the person was not an ordinary person and looked at Su Tong in confusion. Su Tong signaled Wang Zheng to sit down first and briefly told Gao Zhou about the black boxing ring. Regarding the side mission of the black boxing arena, Wang Zheng also said that he had triggered it and had already completed it. This made Gao Zhou feel a little regretful. Obviously, the black boxing arena should be a triggering side mission, even if he did not have boxing proficiency. But there should still be rewards. It's a pity that this black boxing ring has been discovered by the government, and it will naturally be closed down. At least it appears that it will not be opened again in a short time. This is different from breaking the law or not. In this era, crimes against the law are not uncommon. For example, some princes and nobles beat someone to death, and outside robbers let go of murders. As long as the court was not alarmed, no one really took care of it. On the contrary, it is the shady things that arouse people's most fear, such as illegal salt sales, human trafficking, red light cults, black boxing rings, steam factory strikes, etc. Some of these things may not be illegal, while others may be. But if you fall in court, you will inevitably become a weapon of party struggle and be criticized by others. In the final analysis, this is the reason why this country is completely rotten to the core. After Su Tong briefly introduced himself and Gao Zhou, he said, "As you can see, I chose this script, and I enjoy privileges here, not only wealth, but also power within a certain range, but the two of us there are simply too few individuals, and it is difficult to maximize our advantages. Wang Zheng picked up the plate, put all the mutton into the copper pot, and ate with big mouthfuls while listening with his ears perked up. He is not a fool and can naturally understand that this is an olive branch to him. After hesitating for a moment, he asked directly, "Then what's in it for me?" Su Tong likes Wang Zheng's character very much, he is quite straightforward. "What benefits do you want?" Su Tong asked as he ate the mutton. Wang Zheng thought for a while, frowned and said, "You just said that you are rich, and I want you to hire someone to teach me boxing. If you can do it, I will give you the 400 script just now, and give you another 200 script points." When Su Tong heard this, he became interested. After asking around, he found out that Wang Zheng was an otaku. The difference was that his otaku did not stay at home and indulge in games and the happiness of the island country's mentors all day long. According to Wang Zheng, he is a martial arts fanatic and does not have any decent electrical appliances at home, but sandbags, gloves and other messy equipment are his must-haves. For such a martial arts fanatic, his biggest wish as a script-killing player is to learn the boxing techniques of masters from all eras. Of course, this is not an easy task. He has experienced 4 scripts to kill the world and has met those masters, but there is only one who is really willing to teach him, and he is still hiding it. The reason why he fights black boxing in the black boxing ring is because someone promised that he could help him send a message to his superiors after 10 fights. Regarding this condition, Su Tong nodded and agreed on the spot. Considering the strength and reputation of the Ma Qi and Xiang Gongbeo families in the court, this matter was not difficult to achieve. Submit a temporary joining contract to Wang Zheng. After the 3 of them had finished drinking and eating, Gao Zhou went back to the martial arts hall with a depressed look on his face. Wang Zheng must have followed Su Tong back to enjoy his life, and his luck would not be so good. At night, Su Tong returned home and after settling Wang Zheng, he went back to his room to rest. As soon as I walked out of the courtyard, I heard a cry from behind, "Master, you are back." Su Tong looked back and saw Mr. Wen Yuan wearing reading glasses standing in front of the door looking at him. "Gentleman." He had already learned from Dia that this old gentleman was already a yin god, equivalent to half a god. This is not comparable to the crappy stuff like the 5 gods of evil. Su Tong stepped forward and raised his hand towards the old gentleman in front of him. "I just came back. Why don't you rest now?" Wen Yuan shook her head, "I have slept for too long. I need to get up and move around and read a book. I am already old. I can't get enough sleep during the day and I can't fall asleep at night." After speaking, he said to Su Tong, "My boy used to deliver a newspaper every day, but I got up late recently. I haven't read the newspaper for a long time. I don't know what new things have happened in the court recently." Su Tong was stunned for a few seconds and immediately responded, "Sir, wait, I'll get it right away." He walked to the study, looked for newspapers from the past few days, took them out in a hurry, and handed them to Mr. Wen Yuan. Wen Yuan picked up the newspaper and scanned it without the help of a light. She first glanced at the date of the newspaper, frowned and shook her head. "Why have I become more and more confused recently? It will be the beginning of winter in a few days." Su Tong didn't say anything, but stood aside and waited patiently. He understood that Mr. Wen Yuan probably still hadn't understood that he was dead. The content in this newspaper does not have much nutrition, and is more about promoting the implementation of the new coup law. Wen Yuan looked at it for a while, then folded the newspaper and put it in his hand. "Is there any transfer recently?" "No, but some time ago, the Empress Dowager Shenxi issued an order for my father to annex the 3rd Battalion and retrain the troops." Upon hearing this, Mr. Wen Yuan's furrowed brows slightly widened, and a sneer appeared on his face, as if he was talking to himself. "They are still too young. They are a bunch of ignorant people who want to turn things around. It's ridiculous." After saying that, he used Master Yan's style to warn Su Tong, "It's been a mess outside recently. Don't go out and cause trouble, especially those who tout foreign things. You must not come into contact with them." Su Tong could hear that this was a warning to him, and he quickly shook his head and said, "No, I will report to the military headquarters tomorrow and go on duty at the Kintian prison." Hearing that Su Tong was going to Kintian prison, Mr. Wen Yuan was a little surprised, but he nodded for a moment. "Kintian prison is a good place, and it suits you very well. I haven't been out for a long time. After you go to report tomorrow, you can pay a visit. Mr. Gongjing, I have an old relationship with him, so I think I can help you." "Yes." Su Tong remembered the name and stopped chatting with the old gentleman. He said he was sleepy and went back to the room to rest. After Su Tong left, Mr. Wen Yuan took another look at the newspaper in his hand. When he saw which line in the newspaper was written about the implementation of the new coup law to strengthen the country, he sneered a few times. "Mediocrity harms the country and seeks death." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 345. Only when they were far away did Dia and the others dare to poke their heads out of the hall. After all, he is a yin god. Even though he is just a home god, he is still a serious god. Compared with them, these old fairies cannot stand on the stage. I have heard that in the land of Baiyu, some large clans have worshipped house gods for hundreds of years. That is terrifying. Compared with this old gentleman, he is not even a bit worse. When De Yat talked about what he had heard, Su Tong couldn't help but ask, "The old man is a yin god. What should he do if he wants to further become a yang god?" This. De Yat grinned, played with his furry tail and said, "It's difficult. The Shinto is no better than the immortal. Cultivating the yin god is just the first step. If you want to cultivate the yang god, you have to be canonized by the imperial court and tell the world." Since ancient times, there have been a few people who have received this kind of treatment. For example, when Emperor Jiajing of the Ming dynasty was in power, he named Sanfan Genren of Liudang as the sixth patriarch of Yulong hidden in the immortal residence, Huasuwei and Pututianzun. In addition, Emperor Shizu of the Yuan dynasty also named Qiu Chuji of the Quanzhen sect as the real person of Changchun Yan Taoist bishop and so on. But these big guys have too many names, and the emperor can add them to them at every whim, which is the icing on the cake. There are only a handful of other people who have been banned in history. Unless some particularly touching deeds are reported to the court and cause the court and the emperor to sigh, they will be granted posthumous titles. As for the evil spirit like this old gentleman, it is said to be just a flash in the pan. When the Ma family falls and the world looks at it, it disappears into thin air and is not even qualified to enter reincarnation. There are countless cases like this. Su Tong listened to De Yat chattering at the entrance of the hall about a lot of things about spiritual cultivation, then opened the door and walked into the room. After closing the door, he turned around and saw that Lero was already sleeping soundly on the bed. Although Su Tong was curious about what the scales on this girl were, Lero himself couldn't tell where the scales on her body came from. Seeing that she was already asleep, Su Tong put her on the bed. Anyway, the bed was big enough, and it would be very spacious for 2 more people. There was nothing to say all night. When Su Tong woke up early the next morning, he saw Lero lying in his arms. He didn't know what delicious food he had dreamed about, and a naive smile appeared on his face from time to time. The slap on her face yesterday made her face still look red. Su Tong took out some anti-inflammatory medicine and applied it on it, put on new clothes and went to the main hall to have breakfast. It was said to be morning, but it was almost 3 o'clock in the morning, almost 4 o'clock in the morning. Don't think that the gentlemen in the feudal era were really free. In fact, they had to go to court at 5 o'clock, which is equivalent to 5 to 7 o'clock now. The morning time is adjusted according to the seasons, it is 6 o'clock in spring and winter, and 5:30 in summer and autumn. Although it is the emperor's working hours, the ministers have to go to work much earlier. From 3 to 5 in the morning, ministers will wait outside the Meridian Gate. So it was already morning for Ma Chi. While eating, Su Tong called Wang Zheng over. "Dad, I saw that he was very good at fighting yesterday, so I recruited him to be my bodyguard." Question. Ma Chi twitched the corner of his mouth, thinking that you will soon be a powerful imperial guard. You still have the nerve to ask for a bodyguard. Do you think your father has not been embarrassed enough? But Ma Chi didn't speak, and the grandmother on the side immediately responded and glared at her husband Ma Chi fiercely. "It's time to have a bodyguard. The war is in chaos. What if there is something wrong?" After saying that, he asked the accountant to pay Su Tong 300 taels of silver on the spot, which he treated as monthly payment for Wang Zheng. "Besides, Dad, I also want to practice martial arts. Can you find me a master?" Su Tong happily accepted the money and continued to speak with a stern look on his face. After hearing this, Ma Chi's expression finally improved a lot. After all, he is the leader of the Forbidden Army, and his son cannot be an idiot. When he was about to invite a teacher and father from the Forbidden Army, Su Tong grabbed the grandma's hand first and said, "Mom, I heard that there is a martial arts champion named Wu Qiudong who has a good skill. I want to learn it." Naturally, Su Tong didn't know Wu Qiudong, but Wang Zheng did. In reality, he got a fragment of a boxing technique, and the boxing technique was signed by Wu Qiudong. Wang Zheng checked the information and found that Wu Qiudong lived in this era and was a martial arts champion. What's strange is that there is no record of any information about Wu Qiudong. No. Ma Chi's face darkened, he waved his hand and put the bowl on the table, staring at Su Tong with an evil expression. "Even if you ask Tong Zitang and Zhang Sanjia to teach you, I can invite them, but he can't." Su Tong was surprised to find that even the usually arrogant grandma lowered her head and refused to speak. "Does our family have a grudge against him?" Seeing Ma Chi's furious look, Su Tong asked carefully. But Ma Chi curled his lips and ignored him at all. He picked up his official hat and left. As for the eldest grandma, she said with a sad expression, "My child, you can call anyone your master, but this person can't be your father. I was a martial arts student in the same year as him, but he was the #1 scholar, and your father was not." Su Tong had a look of realization on his face, but he didn't believe it at all in his heart. He looked at the grandma's expression that turned red to her earlobes, and raised his eyebrows slightly. "Oh, so that's what happened, mother, then why are you blushing?" The eldest grandma glared and quickly covered her face. "The soup will be hot." Su Tong blinked and continued, "Then why is it white again?" "I sweated so much that the powder fell off." The grandma wiped it quickly, and Su Tong had a bad smile on his face. "Then why is it yellow again?" "You little bastard, you are making fun of your mother." The eldest grandma slapped the table and shook off Su Tong's hand, covered her face and left. Su Tong watched his cheap old lady leave, grinning, and saw that the jade bracelet that had always been inseparable from the grandma's hand had been taken off by him at some point. "Anyway, I have agreed to learn boxing. As for my father and mother, I can't do that much. As for where Wu Qiudong is, don't worry about this. When you enter Kintian prison, are you afraid that you won't be able to find anyone else? I went to the Kintian prison to report today, so naturally I didn't have to go so early. It was too early and the Ministry of War had not yet gone to court. It was almost noon before Su Tong wandered to the Ministry of War to report. Ma Chi had already said hello about this matter. The man in charge of the Ministry of War naturally took Su Tong's hand cordially, gave Su Tong the green light to arrange all the procedures, and sent Su Tong to Kintian prison. Went. Sure enough, there are people in the court who like to be officials. This sentence is not false at all. The foreman of the Imperial Guards of Kintian prison also knew that this was the man who came here for gold plating, and he did not dare to neglect him. He personally took Su Tong around the entire Kintian prison. Actually, this is a casual job, and the gentlemen of Kintian prison are usually old otakus who never leave their homes. Naturally, the work of serving them is done by eunuchs. They, the guards, just need to take a walk here, drink tea, and patrol. Of course, this is Su Tong's treatment, and ordinary imperial guards are naturally not so leisurely. Trash, you can't do this well, you're all trash. As soon as the two of them reached the door of the main hall, they heard a roar of thunder coming from inside. Several eunuchs crawled and hid behind. Chessboards, tables, bronze mirrors and other messy things were thrown out of the door. Some eunuchs couldn't dodge and were smashed to pieces. Immediately, the foreman took Su Tong and hid aside to watch. He pointed to the main hall and said, "You can take it easy when you come to this place from now on. Our prison supervisor is called Fu Anning. He is very shady and angry all day long. He turns his face more easily than turning over a book. Come on, let's hide when we see you." Su Tong nodded and wrote down the name. At this moment, a eunuch was beaten out. His foot slipped and he rolled on the ground, falling right in front of Su Tong. The eunuch looked up at Su Tong, and Su Tong looked at the eunuch. Their eyes met, and the smile on Su Tong's face gradually grew. "Hey, little father-in-law, we meet again." "Ah." Li 11 squinted his eyes and thought about it carefully before suddenly remembering the identity of the young master in front of him. "Oh, it's Mr. Ma." Li 11 didn't care about the cut on his face and stood up quickly. Su Tong gave him a hand, pulled him to his side, and pointed to the angry man in the hall. "What is this lord doing?" "Shh." Li 11 quickly lowered his voice and whispered, "I don't know. In the past few days, Jian Zhen has been like eating gunpowder. Someone just knocked over the teacup, and who would have thought that he would suddenly become furious? Let's go, this is not the place to talk. I'm afraid this Lord Supervisor is going to lose his temper for a while." The foreman waved his hand and signaled everyone to get away quickly. When the prisoner's temper subsides, everyone can wait on him again. Su Tong grabbed Li 11's wrist and said, "Your head is broken. I just happen to have medicine with me. Find a place and I can help you apply it." Li 11's delicate face showed hesitation for a moment when he heard the words, but Su Tong didn't give him this chance. He took him to a secluded corner and began to bandage his wounds. While bandaging, he said, "It is said that we are acquaintances once and twice, so we are acquaintances. In fact, as soon as I saw you, I felt that we were very compatible. You are like a good brother to me. It's a pity that he was not lucky enough to die. I'm so miserable." Li 11's eyes rolled around, and he said with a smile, "Master Ma, aren't you joking? I don't dare to follow you. If you like me, I will be a blessing to you if you use me more in the future." Su Tong's face was full of disapproval. "Hey, you said it as if I was deliberately lying to you. Besides, who is not a slave? My father is also a slave when it comes to it. Everyone is a miserable person. No one should laugh at the same time." What Li 11 said seemed to be touched by something in his heart. He stared straight at Su Tong. Seeing that his sincere expression didn't seem to be fake at all, he suddenly felt an inexplicable sense of familiarity in his heart. Thinking that after so many years, besides his old mentor, there are still people who can treat him as a human being. Li 11 was still filled with sadness in his heart. Su Tong had already bandaged the wound skillfully. He patted Li 11 on the shoulder and said, "Come to me if you need anything in the future. Let's go." After saying that, Su Tong Gren had already walked away without even having a chance to thank Li 11. Seeing that Su Tong and the others were gone, Li 11 looked uncertain for a moment. He looked around and saw no one was around, so he secretly took out 6 copper coins and gave himself a fortune-telling. After taking a look at the hexagram, I went up to the hexagram and got it. Seeing this, Lee 11's eyes showed secret joy, and he hurried back to continue his errands. Little did they know that as soon as Lee 11 left, Su Tong poked his head out of the corner with his head tilted, and the smile on his face became colder and colder. "Hey, don't worry, let's settle our accounts slowly. Sorry, the updates have been unstable recently, and I still feel a bit wet. It's also because my father has been hospitalized with a cerebral infarction. I have been busy running up and down the hospital these days, and the time is really not stable. Fortunately, there is no big problem, and I will be able to do it tomorrow. After being discharged from the hospital, we will resume the third update the day after tomorrow. This dungeon is not big, and the previous steps are almost laid. It will be fast to enter the main line." Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 347. The first day on duty is basically a familiarization process, where you can enter and where you cannot enter. For example, the Hubu in front of the Kintian prison and the Xingbu next to it are not allowed to enter. In layman's terms, they are equivalent to security guards. The people in this house are company employees, and the company boss is the emperor, no, the Empress Dowager Sishan. Working 3 shifts, basically 4 hours a day, is actually quite relaxing. The 2 days of holiday per month are actually just a fiction for Su Tong. If he doesn't want to come, the foreman will not care. After all, this kind of example in the Forbidden Army is too much. For example, relatives of princes and nobles were brought in, given a name, and disappeared the next day. They received a sum of money every month, but the foreman had never seen him. In fact, this is good for these foremen. After all, they are here to be the bosses. If they don't come, so as not to cause any trouble, and they will be implicated. However, Su Tong was obviously an exception. He arrived at work on time every day in the next few days and was never even late. If he hadn't known that he was the son of the March family, who would have thought that any young man could really come here to suffer in these days? When Su Tong came home that day, it was almost dark. As soon as he walked in, his mother stared at him. She grabbed his arm and asked about the jade bracelet. Su Tong shook his head repeatedly to express that he had not seen it. After confirming again and again, the eldest grandma left with a depressed look on her face. After finally getting rid of the eldest lady, Wang Zheng put down the stone lock in his hand and approached Su Tong expectantly. That little look in his eyes clearly said, "Where is my master?" We agreed, but why hasn't there been any movement in the past few days? That's Wu Chuangyuan, not a cat or a dog on the street. It's not that easy to find. Before Wang Zheng could speak, Su Tong rolled his eyes and spoke first. In fact, he had also made inquiries in the past 2 days, but there was no news at all about Wu Qiudong. Other martial arts champions, at least the most junior ones, can be officials, the smallest ones can open a martial arts school, and the least qualified ones can also work in the palace. But Wu Qiudong was different. After this guy won the Wu Chuangyuan, he mysteriously disappeared without any news. Oh. Although he was disappointed, Wang Zheng was not dissatisfied. In fact, this place was much more comfortable to live in than the black boxing stadium, and the food and drinks were delicious. Although Ma Chi was opposed to Su Tong finding a bodyguard in his heart, he saw Wang Zheng. He casually picked up the 60-kilogram stone lock and played with it, and immediately looked at Wang Zheng with admiration. It means that Wang Zheng's monthly income has doubled. Even if he raised such an idle person in vain, it is still worth it. With good food and drink, Wang Zheng was of course not in a hurry. Anyway, his side mission had failed, and it was said that the people in the black boxing field were still looking for him. Su Tong returned to the room and just wanted to take a rest. He had just taken off his clothes and was about to open his mouth to eat the pancake handed by Lero. However, before he could enjoy the happiness of a rich man, a servant came to report, saying it's the young master of the Siang family who is here. Siang Keding, Su Tong frowned. He didn't know what this guy was doing here, so he could only change his clothes in a hurry and go out. Brother Ma, didn't you agree to treat us to a drink? Why haven't I seen you in the past few days? As soon as Siang Keding entered the door, he joked. Not only Siang Keding came, but also Mr. Li from last time. After the two teased Su Tong, Siang Keding pulled him out and said, "Quick, let's go see a strange man today." Strange man. Su Tong didn't know why, and Mr. Li on the side explained, "You don't know, I heard that a strange man came to Daowen Temple. He was not only proficient in divination, but also had superb medical skills. He was called a living god. How can we not go and see how lively it is?" After hearing Master Li boasting like this, Su Tong couldn't help but become interested. It is said that today is far from as depressed as the age of ending Dharma. Even for many heretics, this era of great unification is like a fish in water. The chaotic and corrupt government has made the people miserable and has given 3 religions and 9 streams rich soil for development. But after being here for so long, the stranger I really saw was Li 11, the scourge. So when Mr. Li said this, Su Tong immediately became interested. The 3 of them went straight to Daowen Temple. The 4 of them got on the carriage, and when they arrived at the foot of Fengxia Mountain, they saw many pilgrims going to Daowen Temple to offer incense. In addition to many wealthy families, Su Tong found that there were also many ordinary people among them. The irony is that these people, their clothes are patched, their faces are sallow, their muscles are thin, and they look malnourished, but they are willing to travel such a long way and spend their only savings to come here to burn incense. Brother Siang, I heard that your father is ready to return to the capital. This time the court will bring him back, and I'm afraid he will be entrusted with another important task. Master Li shook the fan in his hand and said. Siang Keding's face was red and full of pride. This time his father returned to Beijing. Before he came back, the imperial edict had been sent to his family. The position of Minister of Military and Aircraft was already a certainty. Su Tong sat aside and watched coldly, looking out the car window from time to time. When he saw an old woman holding a cane and limping with a child towards the mountain, he couldn't help but think of the old monk from Bama Temple. When the 3 people's carriages and horses arrived in front of the Taoist temple, they saw that there was already a sea of people outside the Taoist temple. After hearing about the strange man, many people gathered here to visit, wanting to see what a living god looked like. However, judging from the demeanor of many people walking out of the Taoist temple, they must be disappointed. After the 3 people inquired about it, they found out that it wasn't anyone who saw it. They had to draw lots. Only those who got the draw could get in. Those who didn't get the draw couldn't get in no matter how much money they had to pay. Pretend to be a ghost. Su Tong curled his lips, pushed aside everyone and walked inside. This naturally made many people dissatisfied. A wealthy businessman glared at Su Tong and said, "Why are you in such a hurry? You are rushing to reincarnate." Su Tong curled his lips and looked back at the wealthy businessman with a faint smile. "Are you here to tell your fortune?" The wealthy businessman snorted coldly and said with disdain, "What does it have to do with you?" Oh, Su Tong nodded thoughtfully and walked up to the wealthy businessman. "Your appearance is not good. You have suffered a bloody disaster." The wealthy businessman was startled at first, and his heart skipped a beat. In fact, he had visited the old immortal the day before yesterday. The old immortal once said that if he continued to stay in the capital, there would be a bloody disaster. The wealthy businessman went back and thought about it for a while, but he didn't understand where the disaster came from. Being told this again today, he couldn't help but murmur in his heart. He looked at Su Tong and said, Where did the disaster come from? Come from me. Su Tong raised his fist and hit the wealthy businessman in the face. The wealthy businessman was usually very proud, but how could he dodge this punch? He was immediately beaten on his back and fell down the stairs with a grunt. Mr. Li and Xiang Keting couldn't help but shook their heads helplessly when they saw this. They knew that Ma Hongwen had this temperament and was used to being arrogant and domineering. But the two of them didn't think it was a big deal. A businessman just hit him. With their status, no one would dare to do anything. Everyone's expressions changed when they saw this, and they were surprised whose young master was so domineering. The servants next to the rich businessman were about to get into trouble when they saw this. Stop! Suddenly someone shouted, and everyone looked up and saw an old Taoist walking out of the Taoist temple. Fairy! When everyone saw the living god coming out, they all shouted the name of the god and even knelt on the ground and kowtowed to the old Taoist. Master, be careful. The three big-eyed people were sitting at the entrance of the hall watching a show, but when they saw the old Taoist, they ran away and hid at the entrance of the hall, and even the door was slammed shut. Su Tong looked up and felt a little thump in his heart. Although his face was expressionless, his heart was filled with turmoil. He is actually a living god. The old Taoist who walked out of the Taoist temple had a white-haired face and a jade-like complexion. Even though his hair was covered with silver frost, his whole person's spirit made people look like he had a natural sense of intimacy. Looking at the top of Lao Dao's head, there is actually a lotus pond. There is a lotus in the lotus pond that seems to bloom at any time. There is a faint mist filled with water, and there is a spiritual light. 3 flowers gathered at the top. Su Tong stared blankly at the top of Lao Dao's head. In addition to the theory of adjusting the gods, he had read many other miscellaneous studies and occasionally looked through them. I remember seeing this statement in an introductory book on inner alchemy. The gathering of 3 flowers at the top is a term for inner alchemy. In ancient times, Hua and Hua were related, and Hua was the original character of Hua. Therefore, Sanhua refers to Sanhua, which represents the glory of human body's essence and spirit. The so-called gathering at the top means that the essence, energy, and spirit are mixed together and gathered in one orifice of the entrance. This point is also corroborated in theology. Of course, the old Taoist in front of us is naturally far away from the 3 flowers gathering at the top, but it has already taken shape, and one of the lotus flowers is already about to bloom. It is not an exaggeration to say that he is a character who has half-stepped into the gate of the gods. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 348. Mr. Chen, I told you the day before yesterday that you were in a bloody disaster, ranging from a broken head and bleeding to a serious loss of family and life. However, if there is help from a noble person, it may not be impossible to turn around. Now that the noble person is in front of you, why don't you come and thank me quickly? The gentle voice of the old Taoist and the soft rain made everyone feel like they were bathing in the spring breeze, and the anger in their hearts immediately disappeared. But what was different from everyone else was that when Su Tong heard the old Taoist voice, he could not help but feel an evil fire rising in his heart, as if he felt uncomfortable all over his body. The old Taoist seemed to have noticed something unusual about Su Tong. He couldn't help but look at Su Tong one more time, and continued to maintain that otherworldly expression on his face. Chen Yuanwei didn't know why, but after hearing what the old immortal said, he hurried forward and carefully apologized to Su Tong to express his gratitude. Chen Yuanwei's face was full of embarrassment. His nose was broken after being beaten, but he actually wanted to apologize to the other party and thank him. What kind of logic is this? Ah! Su Tong curled his lips and probably raised his head, as if he was looking at people with his nostrils. In fact, he glanced at Chen Yuanwei with the help of his life ikumen, and looked at the dark clouds above the old man's head. As the saying goes, the moon is dark and the wind is high. On the night of the murder, this luck has already brought disaster, and it seems to be similar to what the old man said. As if he could tell that Chen Yuanwei was still feeling a little unhappy, the old man stroked his beard and said, "Don't mind it. These three young masters are all among the best, and they are all your nobles." When Chen Yuanwei heard this, he was even more confused. He didn't understand the origins of these three people. He was one of the four richest men in the capital and had relatives both inside and outside the court. Why did he still need to rely on the three young boys in front of him to take care of him? Su Tong glanced sideways, and sure enough, after the old man's words fell, the luck of this wealthy businessman really seemed to be gently pushed by a big hand, parting the black fog that originally shrouded his head, revealing a full moon. Golden words. Su Tong couldn't help but feel suspicious when he looked at it, but when he looked at it again, he found that the luck on the head of the wealthy businessman was not rigid and dead. It was completely different from Li 11's golden talk of harming others and benefiting himself. The moonlight was shining brightly, and it seemed that he really had great luck. The old Taoist didn't explain anything to Yuan Chen. He just raised his hands to Su Tong and the others and invited the three of them to come in and watch. "I have been waiting for you three for more than a while today. Let's go in and talk." Su Tong and the three people looked at each other and could all tell that this veteran was indeed extraordinary. So we entered the Taoist temple. After the three people entered, two Taoist boys came out and said to everyone, "It is not convenient for the immortal master to see guests today. Please go back." After saying that, he closed the door, obviously not intending to see any pilgrims again, which inevitably disappointed those pilgrims who had come all the way. Why did the three of them look so familiar just now? Since they couldn't get through the gate, some people simply waited outside the Taoist temple. If they waited for a day at most, they could still see the gods early tomorrow morning. While I was idle, I naturally couldn't help but discuss the identities of Su Tong and the others. Not to mention, someone actually recognized them. After all, Ma Hongwen and his group often commit crimes and crimes. There are many people in the capital who don't know them, but there are very few people who have never heard of their names. When Chen Yuanwei heard that the person who beat him was Ma Hongwen, he rolled his eyes and almost fainted. His relative was an official in the court, and of course he knew that Ma Qi, a member of the imperial army, even though his official position was still in the third rank and was under the jurisdiction of the 9 admirals, the power he held was extraordinary. He could annex 3 battalions and an 80,000-strong army. The military power is in his hands, which is not something that ordinary people can compare with. After learning that the two sons behind Ma Hongwen were Xiang Keding, the younger son of Xiang Gongbeo, the governor of Zhili, and the son of Li Qian, the minister of political affairs of the dynasty, Chen Yuanwei's body froze, and he unexpectedly gave birth to a child in the winter, breaking into a cold sweat. Now he finally understood why the old god said he was in a bloody disaster. If the old god hadn't come out to stop his servants, if a fight had caused any trouble, not to mention he was a mere businessman, even his relatives would have been killed. Be unlucky. Thinking of this, Chen Yuanwei's dull mind finally started to get busy, and he slapped his thigh. "Quick, go home right away." Not to mention Mr. Chen, when Su Tong and the other three walked into the Taoist temple, they found that tea table cakes and 4 futons had been prepared under a peach tree in the Taoist temple. Looking at the hot water that has been boiled in the kettle, it is obvious that these things have not just been prepared. "You 3 gentlemen, please take a seat. I woke up early this morning and saw 3 magpies coming to my door. I knew there must be an important visitor." The old Taoist gently stroked his beard with both hands and motioned for the 3 of them to sit down. Xiang Keding sat in the middle, Su Tong sat on the right, and Mr. Li naturally sat on the left. The old Taoist personally poured a cup of tea for the 3 of them and introduced himself at the same time. He claimed to be Genren Sunlong, who was a disciple of the Shangqing Shenxiao section. Now he came to the capital just because he wanted to find a disciple to pass on the true legacy. The name of Shangqing Shenxiao sect, The second school, does not sound right at first sight, but in fact there is indeed such a section. The difference from Quanzhen and Genji is that the sect has very complex learning, no restrictions, and no sacrifices. The three purities only serve heaven and earth, and emphasize that everything is a thunder method. Su Tong and the three people listened with different expressions. Su Tong definitely didn't believe what this veteran said, because he had read the script and knew that there would be chaos in the capital soon. The strength of this awesome old Taoist is unfathomable. He is probably even stronger than Grandmaster Xueleida. How could he not know why he came out and said that I am here to recruit a disciple? This is either a pretense, or he is deliberately trying to embarrass them. Thinking of this, he glanced sideways at Xiang Keting and Mr. Li. Sure enough, Xiang Keting was sipping the tea in his cup, his eyes flickering as he wondered what he was thinking about. Mr. Li's eyes were already shining and he couldn't wait to ask, Taoist priest, do you think we three have such an opportunity? The old Taoist smiled and said nothing, but looked at the tea in the cups of the three of them. I have 3 hexagrams a day. Now that the three of you are here, I will use your teacup to make a hexagram as a joke. Don't mind if the three of you are not allowed. Okay, we've long heard that the old immortal's skills are all-powerful. Today just opened our eyes. Mr. Li has been fond of such mysterious and magical powers since he was a child. It's rare to see them, so of course he wants to try them. As for Xiang Keting, he smiled and said nothing, but still glanced at the teacup. Only Su Tong looked indifferent. Perhaps because of his dark physique, he didn't have a good impression of this veteran at all. The old Taoist first took a look at Xiang Keting's teacup and the remaining tea in the cup, and nodded, young master is extremely wealthy and has no danger in the near future. I just read the divination, and he has the power of swordsmanship. Xiang Keting raised his brows slightly when he heard this. He picked up the teacup on the table and drank it all in one gulp. He placed the cup on the table so hard that there was a crack on the teacup. How can we solve this? The old Taoist's face darkened slightly when he saw this. Young Master Guoxiang already had the authority to join you just now, but now that he drank it all in one gulp, I'm afraid that this authority won't last long. When I put the cup down, there was a crack in the corner of the cup. Lameness, it's like this, young master, it's best not to go out recently. Haha, what a load of nonsense. Xiang Keting curled his lips, not believing a word of what the old Taoist said. His father is about to return, and he will be the Minister of Military and Aircraft, with the power to control the world's troops. Of course, he will be reused and trained. Anyone who is a little bit thoughtful about this kind of thing will definitely be able to figure it out, so there is no need to be so pretentious. What about me? What about me? Mr. Li's eyes widened and he urged the old man. The old Taoist took a look, hesitated for a moment and then shook his head. No, the water level in the young master's tea is not high. There happens to be a shadow covering the cup. The water cannot see the light and is as dark as a dry well. I'm afraid there may be trouble in the near future. After finishing speaking, the old Taoist took out a talisman from his sleeve and handed it to Mr. Li. Wearing this talisman with you will save your life at critical moments. Mr. Li waited for a long time, but when he got such a result, he couldn't help but feel disappointed, but he still took the talisman. The old Taoist's eyes finally focused on Su Tong. When he looked at Su Tong, the old Taoist grinned. The hall master is originally a camp, and the hall masters of each family are in it. Nothing can be done without soldiers. If there are soldiers but no generals, the sand will be scattered. The old Taoist first recited a poem without thinking. Su Tong's face was expressionless. This poem naturally alluded to the hall behind him, but this old Taoist's strength was unfathomable. What could happen if he could see his own hall? Strange. My little brother is blessed with profound blessings. There will be great joy when he returns home. But unfortunately, he will be traveling soon. I send you 16 words. The road ahead is difficult and you will stop if you encounter water. Don't light up the lamp at night and knock on the door won't listen. Su Tong didn't say anything when he heard this, but he was confused. He didn't plan to travel far away recently. But the old Taoist said so confidently that he had obviously concluded that there was such a thing. Moreover, he confidently only calculated what was happening in front of the three of them. It was clear that he wanted to take a long-term view to catch the big fish. In this case, if the calculation was not accurate, what else could he do? How to catch big fish? Xiang Keding felt unhappy, and Mr. Li was even less happy, so the three of them didn't stay long and left in a hurry, saying goodbye to each other and going home. As a result, as soon as I entered the house, I saw the grandma coming over. "Oh, my little ancestor, why are you back here? Hurry up, there are guests. Go back to the room to clean up." Su Tong was startled when he heard this. It turned out that the guest had something to do with him, but the eldest lady had already pulled him back to the room without explanation, asked the maid to change her into new clothes, and led him to the hall. As soon as he entered the hall, Su Tong couldn't help but stare. "Eh? Why is it you, an old guy? Third, I finished writing it faster and posted it in half an hour. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment." Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 349. Hongwen. As soon as he finished speaking, Ma Chi almost smashed the wine glass over. Su Tong immediately lowered his head and hid behind the grandma as if admitting his mistake. With a dark face, Ma Chi put down the teacup in his hand and said with a smile to Mr. Chen, "Brother Chen, please don't blame me for being rude. No, Ma Gongzi and other hot-blooded men are the rare blood nature of my Datong man today." Chen Yuanwei flattered Ma Chi with a silly smile on his face. But after smiling, he turned his eyes and glared at Su Tong angrily. "Why don't you come and apologize to Chen Yuanwei quickly?" Su Tong stepped forward reluctantly to apologize to Mr. Chen, but in his heart he was more like an outsider, watching the expressions of the 5 people in the hall silently. Why 5 people? In addition to himself, Ma Chi, and Grandma, there were also Yuan Chen and the girl beside him. The girl had a red face from beginning to end, her head lowered, and she was sitting on the chair very reservedly. Su Tong looked from top to bottom and found that the girl's feet were surprisingly small. Mr. Chen also talked more, and when he saw that he had all he needed to say, he took the girl and said goodbye. Before leaving, he glanced at Su Tong with a smile on his face. That mean look on his face made Su Tong really want to punch him again. After they left, Su Tong asked the eldest grandma, but the eldest grandma covered her mouth and smiled. "You are already a grown man. It's time to find a marriage for you. Once you get married, you will be relieved and you won't have to go out and fool around every day." It turned out that after Chen Yuanwei thought about it for a while in front of Daowen Temple, he hurried back as soon as he slapped his thigh. It was for no other reason than to get married. He could not reach the Xiang and Li families, but the Ma family was different. Although Ma Chi was a third-grade official, he was still Han Chinese. Otherwise, how could the Empress Dowager Shenxi only give him real power but refuse to promote him to an official position? Woolen cloth. Then I thought of the Ma family, which just happened to eliminate the misunderstanding just now through marriage. In fact, the conditions of the Ma family are not bad, but who makes Ma Hongwen too useless, who is willing to marry his own girl? Chen Yuanwei was obviously determined to get into the Ma family, not only for the sake of the Ma family's power, but also to avoid Ma Hongwen's revenge in the future. Although Ma Chi didn't like Chen Yuanwei's status as a businessman, he was helpless because Chen Yuanwei gave him too much. He needed money. The imperial court asked him to annex the 3rd Battalion, but refused to allocate money to him. How could he train troops without money? When he was worried, Chen Yuanwei came. The two of them had their own needs and hit it off immediately. They decided on the matter before Su Tong came back. After Su Tong heard what happened, he could only smile bitterly. He didn't expect that not long ago, he was teasing Gao Zhou, and now it was his turn so quickly. But Ma Chi had already decided on this matter, and there was no need to touch his brow. Anyway, he left after completing the main mission, so he didn't take it seriously. However, this old man's calculation was quite accurate, and it seemed that there was indeed something. However, at this time, such a person suddenly came to the capital, and Su Tong felt a bad feeling in his heart. Early the next morning, Su Tong waited at the entrance of Kintian prison with the things he had prepared. Ministers often have to work until mid-afternoon before the day's work is considered finished. Su Tong waited early, just for one person. After waiting for a while, he saw an old man in official uniform walking out of the gate of Kintian prison. Su Tong had already found out clearly that this person was the one he was looking for, so he hurriedly went up to him and said, "Meet Gongjing, gentlemen." The other party was stunned for a few seconds, and then looked at Su Tong doubtfully, convinced that he did not recognize this guard. "I am Mr. Wen'ai Yuan's disciple, Ma Hongwen. Mr. Wen'ai Yuan has mentioned you many times and said that you two are close friends. Today I specially visited you on behalf of my teacher. You are Ma Hongwen." Yang Gongjing was immediately surprised when she heard this. She glanced sideways at Su Tong, with a bit of boredom in her eyes. Su Tong watched his words carefully. Even though Yang Gongjing quickly hid her disgusted look, she could not escape Su Tong's gaze. Su Tong was not surprised at all. After all, Ma Hongwen's reputation is really bad. If his father hadn't been March, an ordinary person would have been beheaded by now for the little things he did. Oh, he turns out to be a student of Wen'ai Yuan. Okay, tell him for me. I haven't seen him for a long time. I'll drink with him again after I have some free time in a few days. Yang Gongjing deliberately referred to her disciple as a student. Obviously she never recognized Ma Hongwen from the bottom of her heart. After saying this, he was about to leave. Although he and Wen'ai Yuan had been friends for many years, he didn't like him as a student at all. However, after taking 2 steps, he suddenly heard a sobbing sound behind him. Yang Gongjing turned around in confusion, and when she saw the tears on Su Tong's face were already falling to the ground, she said in a choked voice, "My master passed away 2 months ago." "What?" Yang Gongjing was shocked when she heard this. She stepped forward and grabbed Su Tong's arm. "2 months ago, why did you notify me now?" Su Tong didn't know why. But this did not affect his performance. On the contrary, he said more sadly, "Mr. lived a poor life. Every day was mostly a book or a green lantern. He rarely mentioned the past to outsiders. He left behind countless instructions. Don't preach loudly, don't do anything big. I don't know the reason, but I don't dare to disobey the teacher's order." Hey! Yang Gongjing had mixed feelings in his heart. He knew that Wen'ai Yuan was good at everything. Whether it was literary talent or knowledge, he was many times better than himself. It's a pity that the fraud case back then has become a stain that can never be erased. Nowadays, the court is complicated, so he must be concerned about his identity, so he refuses to inform himself. "Brother Wen'ai Yuan, why are you doing this? Yang is already gray-haired and old. How can he care about the opinions of outsiders?" Yang Gongjing was still in a state of self-movement. Su Tong curled his lips, knowing that if the old guy continued to cry, he would not be able to do his own thing. So she curled her lips and cried more miserably than Yang Gongjing, which finally woke Yang Gongjing out of her self-movement. Seeing Ma Wenhua crying with snot and tears in front of her, Yang Gongjing didn't like this dude in her heart. Disciple, but finally no longer treats him coldly. He stretched out his hand to pull him up and said, "It doesn't matter, the deceased is long gone, and the living are like a husband. Looking at your clothes, could you be on duty in the palace?" Su Tong wiped his tears and nodded, "I happen to be working as a bodyguard in Kintian prison." "Oh, that's fine. Your teacher and I are considered close friends. If you have anything to do in the future, please let me know." Yang Gongjing's words were originally just polite, but Su Tong raised his head and said, "There is something I want to ask Mr. Yang to help me with." Yang Gongjing glared and thought, "Is it so direct? I'm just being polite, nothing else." It was just the words that were said and the water that was thrown out. Even though Yang Gongjing hated Ma Hongwen even more now, she still asked, "Tell me what's the matter and let me try." Su Tong never thought about winning Yang Gongjing's favor, and immediately explained that he wanted to find Wu Qiudong. Although Yang Gongjing was surprised, this matter was not a big deal. She asked Su Tong to wait here, turned around and went into Kintian prison. After a while, he walked out again and handed Su Tong a note. "Tong, actually, you should go to the Ministry of War to find him. This man was once the top military scholar. The Ministry of War has his own files." Su Tong took the note and said with a smile, "Hey, every family has sutras that are difficult to recite. Humph, you also understand what difficulty is." Yang Gongjing's face was full of sarcasm, and she ignored Su Tong and walked away. Opening the note, there was an address written on it. "In fact, I really can't go to the Ministry of War to find Wu Qiudong, not to mention that I don't know anyone in the Ministry of War, let alone let my father Ma Chi know about this matter, and I still haven't shed my skin yet." And he was just testing this time to see if Qin Tianjian had such unpredictable abilities as rumored. He didn't expect Qin Tianjian to find someone so easily. This couldn't help but make him more and more interested in the Kintian prison in front of him. Just as he was about to leave, he suddenly heard panicked footsteps behind him, causing him to turn around. At first glance, it was Li 11. When Li 11 saw Su Tong, he quickly grabbed him and asked, "Have you ever seen Deputy Superintendent Yang?" Just leaving, seeing his nervous look, Su Tong pointed his finger casually. Li 11 didn't even bother to thank him, and quickened his pace to catch up. After a while, Yang Gongjing, who had just left, hurried back with the support of Li 11. Su Tong originally planned to leave, but as soon as he took 2 steps, he heard from a distance, "Imperial decree." Su Tong could only stand aside and wait with everyone. The old eunuch who came to announce the decree was still the same old eunuch from last time. Holding a roll of yellow silk, the old eunuch walked into the Kintian prison and came out after about a stick of incense. He didn't notice Su Tong coming and going in a hurry. After everyone left, Su Tong was ready to leave. Unexpectedly, as soon as I took 2 steps, I heard someone shouting from behind, "Who is that? Ma Hongwen, hurry up, call your foreman, get ready immediately, follow me out of Beijing." Yang Gongjing wanted to call someone anxiously, but she didn't know who to call in her hurry. When she saw Su Tong, she said without thinking. Seeing this, Su Tong had a premonition that something big was going to happen, so he quickly called the foreman. "You go out of Beijing with Deputy Supervisor Yang. Remember not to alert anyone. Don't reveal your identity unless absolutely necessary." The man who spoke was the supervisor of Kintian prison. Su Tong stood below and looked at him. This supervisor looked like he was in his 40s, with a Chinese character face, big eyes, and a loud voice that shook his ears. When he finished speaking, Su Tong also received a prompt from the prop booklet. The main mission that he had been thinking about for a long time was finally here. Main Mission 1, Field Trip to Beijing. Mission description: the Kintian supervisor discovered a special incident that has alarmed the court and may even affect the current government. Yang Gongjing was specially sent to investigate. Mission objective: protect Yang Gongjing's safety. Mission punishment: extremely serious. Su Tong received the main mission, but he couldn't help but think of the words of the dragon-seeking Taoist. A flash of light flashed in his eyes. It seemed that he had to take the bait. Infinite script killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 350. What happened outside could make Qin Tianjian move so quickly? It only took half an hour for all the entourage to be ready to go out. Foreman Zhou didn't know clearly and didn't want to find out. Qin Tianjian is too mysterious. It seems like a place for idle work on weekdays, but in history, whenever Qin Tianjian was used, nothing was good. The most important thing is that this job is not a thankless job. If I know something that I shouldn't know, I might drown in the latrine the next day because I didn't take off my pants when I went to the toilet. So before setting off, the foreman called Su Tong and the others over and told them one thing: don't pry, don't talk too much, don't look around. In short, from now on, they are just wooden people. They will do whatever they are told, with one more word: don't even ask. It's a pity that other people can hear these words, but Su Tong, the young ancestor, doesn't care about this. It was fine before departure, but after departure, I found that Li 11 was also in the accompanying team. I was very happy. He followed Li 11 on horseback, talking and laughing. Foreman Zhou's face was extremely ugly, but he had no temper at all. He slapped his head and said, "Oh, I'm also dizzy. Why did I bring this little ancestor with me?" But the team has already set off, and even the young master of the March family cannot turn back at this time. It was useless for the foreman to regret in his heart. He thought to himself that not only would he have to serve Mr. Yang, but he would also have to serve such a living ancestor. He couldn't bear the responsibility for anything that happened to either of them. We can only let people take care of him carefully and try not to let anything happen to Mr. Ma. Li 11 was actually quite surprised. Seeing Mr. Ma's face full of excitement, he shook his head inwardly and thought to himself that this kind of young man behaved like this because he didn't know how high the sky was. If he knew that he was going to do this, he might have. I don't know if I would be so excited if I risked my life. However, Li 11 thought about it and realized that this might not be a bad thing. On the official road, fast horses are galloping, running like the wind and leaving no trace. Each horse is hung with 2 rolls of yellow talismans, which are magical talismans. After leaving the capital gate, Deputy Supervisor Yang took out a thick stack and distributed it to them. 6 animals divine talisman, cannot be taken away from the world of this script. Active skill 1, divine movement. Being tied to a mount can increase the mount's movement speed by 200% and make it tireless, but it will greatly shorten the mount's lifespan. This item can only be used on mounts within the 6 domestic animals. Cooling time, none. Duration, 12 hours. This is a good thing. It must be the handiwork of Qin Tianjian. It's a pity that I can't take it away, otherwise I will have to find a way to make a wave of it no matter what. Even though Deputy Supervisor Yang looked very old and his eyes were dim, Su Tong looked around with the help of his life ikemen and found that although this old guy was just an ordinary person, he had a talent behind him and turned into a heron. Protect behind you. This is the official destiny of a 6th grade official. Coupled with Deputy Supervisor Yang's own talents, generally evil and sneaky people would not dare to get close. Moreover, he is a 6th grade official with a low official rank, but because of his status as Qin Tianjian, he carries the emperor's orders wherever he goes. Even the local magistrates and governors do not dare to neglect him. Of course, I won't neglect them. After all, they are here to do a task, and they are not the Anti-Corruption Bureau. If they don't check their attendance, and they don't review the administration, no one will offend them if they just serve me obediently. After a day's walking, there were many mountains and ridges along the way. Although it was an official road, there were many thieves in the green forests around the remote location. Especially these days, life was getting harder and harder, and there were naturally more and more robbers. If it were an ordinary businessman, he would rather travel by water than travel across mountains and rivers like this. If you encounter any green forest bandits, even if you save your life, you will still have to be chopped into pieces. Fortunately, their group moved very fast. Occasionally, there were a few thieves who wanted to stop them on the road. The foreman immediately showed his guy, with a bright big knife, and split the tree trunk as thick as a bowl into 2 pieces. The thieves knew it when they saw it. The idea stuck in his hand and he retracted his head again. However, Su Tong took one look at the foreman's open tiger's mouth and thought that he might not be able to play with a knife again this month. The group of people hurriedly drove for 2 days before arriving at Beijing City. Master Yang declined the banquet hosted by the magistrate of Beijing Prefecture, changed horses at the inn, and continued on his way. This could not help but make Foreman Zhou feel miserable. They were not masters of the imperial family, but ordinary imperial guardsmen. They were rushing so slowly that their thighs were almost torn. I thought I could take a rest in Beijing, but I didn't even drink a sip of water and had to set off in a hurry. It was true that I was unhappy. However, what surprised Foreman Zhou was that he thought that Mr. Ma would be unable to hold on for a long time. But when he looked back, he didn't look tired at all. He was much better than the rest of them. Hey, after all, a tiger father has no dog son. It seems that this horse master is not so unbearable. This discovery greatly improved Foreman Zhou's impression of Ma Hongwen. When he thought about it again, he was never late for work. It seemed that people in the capital were saying how exaggerated Mr. Ma was, but that may not be entirely true. After all, he had heard hearing is false, seeing is believing. But when they left Beijing and arrived in Shijiazhuang, they stopped complaining. Victims kept appearing in their sights, and they knew there was a flood in Henan without asking. It was said that the Ministry of Household Affairs allocated money for disaster relief, but Mr. Yang knew very well that this money would not reach the victims at all, and even food would not be available. It is impossible to reach the mouths of disaster victims. Because the funds allocated were too small, a mere 200,000 taels of silver, not even enough to make a splash. Not to mention water control, food distribution, and feeding the mouths of the officials below. Officials with some conscience can only try their best to save people, such as changing people's rations to bran, mixing soil and sand into the relief porridge, half a bowl of stick noodles and half a bowl of guanyin steamed bread made from soil and noodles. As long as you can't kill someone by eating it, you dare to eat it. But it's still not enough, there are too many victims. When the flood comes, thousands of miles of fertile land will be destroyed. After the disaster, there will be a great epidemic, and then there will be chaos, which will cause corpses to litter the fields and graves everywhere. Sir, it's getting dark and we are exhausted. Why don't we find a place to rest first? Foreman Zhou looked at the sky, followed the car on horseback, and said to Yang Gongjing through the car window. Yang Gongjing didn't want to delay. After all, there was a lot of stakes in Lianshan. Every delay would increase the risk, but he was indeed tired. Even if he was sitting in a carriage and bumping along the way, he would be tired at such an old age. It's really unbearable. Let's see if there is a village ahead. Let's stay in the village for one night and just say we are passing businessmen. Don't disturb the villagers. As soon as Yang Gongjing said these words, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Foreman Zhou led his people to find a village ahead and went to the home of the village chief and explained the situation. When the chief learned that they were businessmen, he couldn't help but raise his brows and rub his fingers. Foreman Zhou was unambiguous and took out a piece of silver and handed it over, asking the headman to prepare food for them. Anyway, this money belongs to work and can still be reimbursed when I go back. The headman weighed the money and grinned, okay, you guys can come over here. This is a big house, enough for you to live in. Foreman Zhou saw that it was indeed a large mansion, so he nodded and led someone back to report to Yang Gongjing. Huh. As soon as the carriage and horses entered the village, Li 11 frowned. Su Tong glanced around and saw that almost every house in the village was hung with white lanterns and the doors were closed. However, Su Tong was keenly aware that behind these doors, there seemed to be pairs of eyes looking at him. When everyone entered the yard, Yang Gongjing asked people to keep an eye on the carriages and horses. There were too many refugees now. Don't let these refugees eat the horses. After a while, the chief came with food, a large iron pot with meat stewed to a pulp. When the lid was lifted, a strong smell of meat wafted out from the pot. Leader Zhou and the others, who had not eaten anything in the past few days, were all stunned when they saw the meat. In addition to the pot of meat, there were also several large pancakes and a pot of old wine. Su Tong didn't say anything when he saw this. He just looked at Li 11. Li 11 happened to be looking at him as well. The two looked at each other. No one said anything, but they seemed to have said everything. Yang Gongjing walked out and took a look at the pot of meat, frowned, and seemed about to say something, but after thinking about it, she didn't say anything. She just said, "You will be on guard duty tonight. In a disaster-stricken place, don't slack off." After speaking, he waved to Su Tong and threw him half a dry biscuit and a cloth bag from his sleeve. This cloth bag contains insect repellent powder. Sprinkle it in the surrounding yards. After saying nothing, he turned around and entered the door. As soon as the door was closed, he heard poetry starting to be recited inside. It is better for a husband and wife to die of hunger together every year. It is better for a concubine to go to the vegetable market. If the husband returns home with $3,000, he can travel 1 mile with one wife. Su Tong and Li 11 were stunned when they heard this, and then looked at team leader Zhou and the others who could not wait to start eating meat. Their expressions froze, and their stomachs suddenly twitched. "Master Ma, little father-in-law, come quickly." When team leader Zhou saw that the two of them were not moving, he enthusiastically called them to come and eat. Although the price is a bit different, it is a rare delicacy to have such delicious food in this place. The corner of Li 11's mouth twitched, and a sneer appeared on his face. He shook his head and said, "Our family believes in Buddhism and is a vegetarian." Su Tong even said with disdain on his face, "It's a wilderness, but there are no delicious food. It's okay not to eat it." After saying that, Su Tong walked out of the yard with the bag in his hand. Li 11 followed closely behind, and when the two of them walked out of the door, they saw someone waiting in the distance and a few people standing in a circle, chatting about something not far away. After seeing the two people coming out, they looked at each other and immediately left. "Master Ma, this place is not a good place, so be careful tonight," Li 11 lowered his voice and said. When Su Tong heard this, he looked at Li 11 up and down and said with a smile, "Thank you, Eunuch Li, for reminding me." Li 11 took out a meat pie from his sleeve and was about to give it to Su Tong, but Su Tong fumbled around in the cloth bag behind him and took out a chicken drumstick, put it to his mouth and started to chew it. Looking at the chicken drumsticks in Su Tong's hand, and then looking at the pancakes in his own hands, Li 11 suddenly felt that the pancakes were no longer fragrant. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 351. Leader Zhou and the others enjoyed the food very well. They had been exhausted on the road these past few days. Seeing that Su Tong and the little father-in-law didn't like to eat, he took the initiative to stop the patrol work in the first half of the night and let them have a good rest, so they felt more at ease. In fact, team leader Zhou originally wanted to let young Master Ma have a good night's rest, but now that young Master Ma has spoken, team leader Zhou no longer insists. After a while, team leader Zhou was already full of wine and food. They ate all the rotten meat in the pot, returned to the room and fell asleep. After a while, you can hear snoring in the house. It seems that they have been traveling for the past 2 days and are indeed exhausted. At night the two set up a bonfire in the yard. Su Tong didn't know where he took out 2 apples and threw them to Li 11. After adding some firewood to the campfire, he asked Li 11 what happened this time and where he was going. Li 11 picked up the apple and took a bite. He looked back at Yang Gongjing's room behind him, lowered his voice and whispered in a voice that the two of them could hear, "I don't know the specifics. I just said that there were people near the Yellow River Mountains. It's evil. I want Kintian's supervisor to investigate quickly." Li 11 said this in a evasive way, obviously not daring to tell the truth. Su Tong nodded and didn't ask any more questions. He turned to ask about other things, such as whether the divination that Li 11 made at his door that day was accurate, and whether he wanted to give them another divination to see if this was the case. "What is the result of the trip?" Li 11 even laughed, saying that he was just joking and couldn't be serious. But I was speechless for a while. His words were not gold-plated words. They were actually a kind of evil magic. They looked like gold-tongued words, but in fact they were used to steal people's luck. In the end, they were defeated by Mr. Ma. Not to mention how depressed I felt. Li 11 didn't want to say much on this topic, so he changed his tone and said, "It's nothing if I just try some tricks. On the contrary, Mr. Ma really impressed our family." "Oh. How do you say this?" Su Tong asked, pretending to be surprised. "There are many criticisms of the young master in the capital, saying that you are greedy for women and drinking. However, after 2 or 3 days' journey, the young master is seen to be exhausted. It can be seen that the rumors are often false, and the young master is actually a hero." Li 11's words seemed to be flattering, but in fact they were further testing Su Tong. Unfortunately, Li 11 didn't know that Su Tong had already typed up the draft on the way here. When he heard this, his expression suddenly darkened and he threw a piece of firewood into the bonfire. The firelight shone on his face, giving this delicate face a hint of sophistication and composure that was inconsistent with his age. "What do you think of me and Xiang Keding?" His voice was hoarse and low, seeming to be full of helplessness and anger. Li 11 thought for a moment and said, "The Xiang family is at the peak of its power now. Even before Xiang Gongbeo comes back, the decree has already arrived. The position of the Chief Minister of Military and Aircraft is already confirmed. This young man is naturally one of the best among men. Humph, since he is a dragon and a phoenix among men, who am I?" Su Tong's face was full of gloom. "This." Li 11 seemed to understand something. "So what if my father takes the position of coordinator of the Forbidden Army? After all, he is still the Xiang family's dog. If I am not useless, how can the Xiang family rest assured that my father can take the position of coordinator of the Forbidden Army?" After Su Tong finished speaking, he looked sideways at Li 11, his eyes becoming sharp. "Do you know why I told you this?" Li 11's scalp numbed, and he suddenly had a bad feeling in his heart. He had been hiding in the palace for 2 years, and he had seen many murderous methods in the palace. Years of vigilance made him look sharply at the apple in his hand. "Don't worry, I don't mean to harm you. I'm just telling you this because you are so similar to that friend of mine." Su Tong's expression softened. He took out a banana, unhurriedly opened the banana peel, put it in his mouth and ate it, with a slightly nostalgic look on his brows. "Friend." This was the second time Li 11 heard Ma Hongwen say this, and he couldn't help but wonder, who is that friend of yours? He, it's a coincidence that when he and I met, it was also in such a dark night. Su Tong narrowed his eyelids, took out a bottle of wine and handed it to Li 11's hand. "Is there such a coincidence?" Li 11 said with pretended surprise on his face as he took the drink. The two touched each other lightly. Su Tong took a sip and put down the glass, sighing, "A pot of turbid wine, a disagreement, swordsmen meeting each other, and I narrowly won by half a move. Hiss. It's like we don't know each other without fighting." Li 11 nodded, then continued to ask, "Then that time and that moment?" Su Tong shook the drink in his hand. "It's just at this moment. So similar, Li 11 was shocked. Like, very similar, but you lack one thing than him. What is it? After Li 11 finished speaking, his face suddenly turned cold, and he cursed himself for being stupid. Why did he ask this question? What else is missing? Isn't it just a missing leg? What, can you still reattach it for me? However, Su Tong seemed to know what Li 11 was thinking, patted him on the shoulder and said, "You are too timid, my friend is much bolder." Li 11's face suddenly looked better after hearing this, knowing that this was both a way to win over him and a test of himself. When they were about to say something, their ears twitched and they immediately closed their mouths. A faint cry came from outside the door. The two of them strained their ears to listen, only to hear the cry getting closer and closer. After a while, I heard a knock on the door, bang, bang, bang. There was a sudden knock on the door in the middle of the night, which would make anyone feel alert. Su Tong and Li 11 were startled at the same time, and the first thought in their minds was of those villagers. This village had felt something was wrong since they entered. After all, these are not good times. The simple folk customs are fake. There are also many bandits and robbers who pretend to be villagers to kill people and steal goods. But then I thought about it and felt something was wrong. If it was really a robber who committed murder and expropriated goods, why bother knocking on the door and just break in? Su Tong looked over at the Kimen with his life eye, and his expression suddenly changed slightly. He saw that there seemed to be a strange fluctuation behind the door, but when he took a closer look, he couldn't tell what was going on. "Headmaster, that thing just now doesn't seem to be a human being." Da Ya woke up at some point and stood at the entrance of the hall staring. Su Tong knew of course that the thing was definitely not a good thing. If there is a ghost, I have many ways to destroy him, but the problem is that I am afraid that he is not a ghost. The lime that Yang Gongjing asked him to sprinkle around the house was not just lime, but also mixed with a large amount of exorcism. I have read it in the prop booklet and found that the thing has the effect of driving away evil spirits. If it is really a ghost, it should be driven away as soon as I walk in front of the door. Li 11 was sitting aside, and when he heard the knock on the door, there was a look of anger in his eyes. Perhaps he was aroused by Su Tong's words just now, or maybe he understood the meaning of Su Tong's words just now. Li 11 was about to step forward and open the door to prove to Mr. Ma that he was not a timid person, but Su Tong pulled him back. He suddenly remembered what Taoist Sun Long said, "If you don't light a lamp at night, you won't knock on the door and don't listen." Thinking of this, he glanced at the bonfire in front of him, grabbed a handful of sand, and put out the bonfire. The knocking on the door continued, but much slower than before. Su Tong and Li 11 stood in the yard waiting. Sure enough, after a while, the crying outside the door slowly faded away. Li 11 bravely walked to the door, put his face against the door, squinted, and looked out through the crack in the door. It was pitch black outside, I couldn't see my fingers, I couldn't see anything. No. This thing is definitely not human. At this time, Li 11 suddenly noticed the door and saw a pool of blood on the ground at the door. Looking carefully, there were two vague footprints in the blood. Who cares? Just be careful tonight. We'll leave here early tomorrow morning. Su Tong also had a bad feeling in his heart. He felt that this place was too weird, so it would be better to leave as soon as possible. After all, his main mission was not to conquer demons, but to protect Mr. Yang in the house. If there is something wrong with this old guy, he will be in trouble. Thinking of this, Su Tong couldn't help but feel a little regretful. If he had known earlier, he would have thought of a way to arrange for Wang Zheng to work in Qintian prison. If this guy was here, the pressure on his main mission would be much easier. Li 11 thought about it, and it was the same truth. It was better to do less than to do more. However, just as the two were discussing whether to reinforce the door, a light suddenly shone on them. "What are you two doing? Who knocked on the door just now? I saw Foreman Joe walking out of the room holding an oil lamp, yawning and asking. Don't light the lamp. Su Tong's heart skipped a beat and he shouted quickly. But Foreman Joe was full of confusion. Why don't you light the lamp? It's so dark that you can't see anything. Mr. Ma, little father-in-law, you are sleepy too. Why don't you go back to sleep? I'll take your place. Foreman Joe was about to move forward as he spoke, but when he took a step, Su Tong and Li 11 took a step back. Neither of them spoke, but their eyes were staring directly behind Foreman Joe. Why don't you talk? Foreman Joe raised the oil lamp to see more clearly, but as soon as he raised the oil lamp, he felt something cold dripping on his head. Huh? Why is it raining? As he said that, he touched it with his hand, and felt it was sticky, and the smell of blood wafted over. Foreman Joe is after all the foreman of the Forbidden Army. He has also practiced in martial arts for several years. He also worked as a bodyguard when he was young. When he looked at it through the light, his face suddenly changed. He turned around suddenly and raised the oil lamp to shine back. At the same time, the other one had already pulled out the dagger from his waist, and was about to stab the dagger out with one move. This move can be regarded as an extremely beautiful counterattack. If a person is blindly illuminated by a light suddenly shining on his face, he will inevitably close his eyes subconsciously. At this time, if he stabs him with a knife, he will definitely cause chaos to the other party. However, Foreman Joe may never have imagined that the person standing behind him was not a human being, but a bloody mouth. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 352. Ah! It had such a big mouth. This monster had no head, no body, no eyes, and even no arms and legs. With such a big mouth, it aimed at Foreman Joe's head and chewed it off in one bite. This would frighten ordinary people to death, and they might not even know how to hide. But after all, Foreman Joe was a bit brave. Seeing that he couldn't escape, he used the Overlord move to hold the head up, with both hands raised, and his legs slightly arched. He used his strength to hold the big mouth that had been bitten off firmly. Isn't he afraid? Of course he was afraid, but the fear was so extreme that he would either be scared to death or explode in fear. Foreman Joe obviously fell into the latter category. However, this thing is only a moment of courage, which will fail again and again, and will be exhausted 3 times. You are brave, but you are facing demons and ghosts, and how can a mortal body compare with it? Foreman Joe just held his hands up when he heard the cry of a woman. The cry came towards him. He followed the sound and looked deep into the big mouth. Foreman Joe trembled instantly, and his face turned pale with fright. I saw that there was half a woman deep in that big mouth. The woman's lower body was missing, only the upper half was there. The body was already connected with the bloody mouth, and that half of the face was rotten. She stared at the Foreman Joe with wide eyes and said, "Where is my child?" After asking where my child was, Foreman Joe didn't respond, but there was a cry from his stomach, "He's here." Foreman Joe's legs went weak on the spot. Think about it, everyone, in the middle of the night, there is a bloody mouth with a woman inside. She shouted and promised in her stomach. It is so scary that even a leopard can't stand it. As soon as his legs weakened, his body could no longer hold up. Soon enough, a hand grabbed his collar and pulled him back hard. Crack! Foreman Joe trembled all over. He managed to raise his head and look down. He saw that his 2 thighs were already bloody. He was just a little short of a distance away. He was afraid that he could not save his 3rd leg. Su Tong threw him back and asked Dia, "What is this?" Dia's head was like a rattle, and she thought to herself, "If you ask me, Who will I ask? This thing looks so weird. At first glance, it looks like a bloody shell. When it opens, it has a bloody mouth. Foreman Joe's thighs were still hanging in her mouth, and she didn't mind the sore and sweaty feet of Foreman Joe. Her mouth was rattling, and she ate so deliciously. Those who didn't know better thought they were chewing pig's trotters. Seeing this, Su Tong no longer cared about hiding his clumsiness, summoned Fa Cai, transformed into a big sword, flew and lunged, leaping high like an eagle spreading its wings. The blade roared with fierce light, and slashed hard on the big mouth. Puff! A wide gash was cut open, which was beyond Su Tong's expectation. However, when he landed and turned around, his pupils tightened, and he saw that the gash just opened had actually healed. What's even weirder is that this mouth can not only open forward, but also open backward. The big mouth opens, and a bunch of blood-stained hair flies out of the mouth and wraps around Su Tong's ankle. He pulls hard and he wanted to pull Su Tong into that big mouth. Come on, come on. The monster had two mouths, one in front and one in back. The one in the front mouth was a woman, and the back was a dense crowd of human heads. It made a sharp scream, trying to pull Su Tong in. Seeking death, Su Tong's eyes widened and he activated his demonic power. Dark blue fire ignited quickly along the blade, which looked particularly evil and domineering in the dark night. He raised his hand and struck with the knife. Boom! The fire exploded in the monster's mouth, and the magic flame instantly ignited it, causing the human heads in the monster's mouth to let out painful whines. Su Tong's magic flame is now different from what it used to be. It not only has the corrosive fire bonus of Ember, but also has the strengthening effect of LV4 Dark Physique. However, after a scream came from the monster's mouth, Su Tong was surprised to find that everything burned and the inextinguishable demonic flames gradually disappeared from the monster's mouth. My child. Although the flame disappeared, the woman's wailing became more and more shrill. She suddenly turned around, opened her big mouth, and rushed towards Su Tong. Su Tong frowned, put away his fortune, and kept retreating. At the same time, the cold pistol appeared in his hand. Bang! Bang! Firelight spurted out one after another, and the bullets hit the woman's body, splashing with blood. However, this seemed to only deepen the woman's anger and did not cause any substantial damage. For a moment, she even sped up and rushed towards him. Su Tong glanced at Yang Gongjing's room from the corner of his eye, and vaguely seemed to hear a banging sound in the room. He didn't know what Master Yang was doing at this moment. Seeing that the monster was in trouble, Su Tong pulled the trigger and quickly retreated, trying to lure the monster to the stable behind the house. Not far away, Li 11 squinted his eyes and saw that Mr. Ma was indeed extraordinary. Not only was he very powerful, but he also seemed to be proficient in different arts. The evil fire just now was still fresh in his memory, and he couldn't help but think of his own. Another good brother, Huowaji. At this moment, seeing Su Tong being forced back step by the monster, Li Zijhen planned to help, so as to leave a favor in Mr. Ma's heart. Suddenly, a scream came from the side, which startled Li 11. Looking back, I found that the scream was actually Foreman Joe. Ordinarily, he should have screamed. After all, both thighs were gone. Even if he returned alive, he would still be a cripple. According to the rules, the most you can do is give him a sum of money. If you want to survive for the rest of your life, you have to either beg on the street or find a shady job. For example, working as a cobbler in a corpse sewing shop is a good job. Li 11 didn't take it seriously at first. There were so many pathetic people in this world, so he was also a pathetic person. But when he looked back, everyone was stunned for a moment. Even though he was born in Mission, he was so surprised and speechless by the strange scene in front of him. Ah! Ah! Foreman Joe lay on the ground, letting out heart-piercing screams. He had just escaped from death and passed out happily, so he didn't have to feel the sudden pain. But before he could fall asleep, he was awakened by a severe cramping pain in his abdomen. When he stared, he found that his belly was actually round. A person's face can be clearly seen under the thinly stretched belly. Foreman Joe, who had always only known how to farm, suddenly experienced the surprise of a good harvest. But the child in his belly did not bring him any sweetness. Instead, it frightened team leader Joe like never before. Seeing this, Lee 11 pulled out a dagger, rushed forward and stabbed Foreman Joe in the belly. As a result, the blade pierced the belly, but it could not be stabbed. I saw a bloody palm torn open from the belly, revealing a head full of blood. The facial features were intact, and he even had a beard. He grinned at Lee 11 and raised his other hand. Lee 11 realized that his dagger was actually firmly held in his hand by this gadget. What is this? In shock, Lee 11 decisively kicked him forward, pulled out his dagger and quickly stepped back, hitting the door of the room where Foreman Joe and his party were resting. With this collision, the door suddenly shook and made a harsh sound. It stands to reason that with such a loud commotion outside, the Imperial guards in the room should be awakened no matter how useless they are. However, Lee 11 pricked up his ears and heard that instead of making any movement from the Imperial guards in the room, they heard furtive laughter from time to time. Lee 11 pressed his back against the door and squinted his eyes along the crack in the door to peek inside. He saw corpses lying scattered on the bed, with blood dripping down along the corners of the wall. I could vaguely see some dark shadows on some corpses, pulling and chewing something. Hiss. Lee 11's eyelids twitched violently, and he couldn't help but secretly regret in his heart. If he had known today, he would have waited to learn the art of talisman before leaving. Mission's talisman technique is a unique skill in the world. Even if he only needs to learn a little bit, it is enough to deal with the situation at hand. But now it is too late for Lee 11 to regret it. Just as he was stunned, a fishy wind blew towards his face. Lee 11 tensed up and raised his hand, only to see that his palm turned black, and a sinister force invisible to the naked eye was shot out from his palm. Mission's unique skill is the soul-driving hand. The palm was like a swimming dragon, and it hit the bloody doll that was flying in the air. Suddenly the doll's body froze in mid-air, and a bloody mist exploded from its body. Lee 11 grabbed the doll in the air with his fingers, and the yin sha that he had just punched out unexpectedly retracted, holding the doll in mid-air, and then swung it out with his palm, hitting the wall hard. Immediately, blood spattered and pieces of rotten flesh dripped from the wall. After solving this thing, Lee 11 could not wait to rejoice when a huge pain suddenly hit his waist. He saw a skinny bloody hand, who didn't know when it came out from the crack in the door, and grabbed him on the lower back. Looking back along his arms, he could see a pair of scarlet eyes staring at him through the crack in the door. His eyes were like those of a wolf smelling blood. Lee 11 felt a chill in his heart. He kicked the door panel and flew out with the door panel and the kid behind him. When he looked at his lower back, he saw blood dripping from his lower back, which made his face tremble with pain. When he raised his head, a pair of scarlet eyes in the room stared at him like life-threatening red lights in the dark room. Seeing this, Lee 11 felt a chill in his heart. Damn it, is it possible that I am going to die here? Just as Lee 11 was covering his wound and retreating step by step, he suddenly heard a buzzing sound of the door opening behind him, and only heard, "Hit them with this." It was Yang Gongjing who walked out of the room. He opened the door a crack and leaned half of his body out. After seeing Lee 11, he casually threw a long stick covered with gold powder to Lee 11. When Lee 11 said something, Yang Gongjing saw the bloody dolls out of the corner of her eye. The fat on her old face trembled, and the door closed again with a bang. If you listen carefully, you can hear a subtle sound of door pins behind. Lee 11 was stunned, looked at the golden stick in his hand, and then at Yang Gongjing who locked the door. He twitched the corner of his mouth and couldn't help but cursed in his heart, "Damn, this old guy, is so stubborn. Infinite script killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 353. Bang. 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 Under the empty night, the piercing sound of gunshots was heard endlessly. The horses in the stables did not know whether they were frightened by the sudden gunshots or smelled the strong smell of blood in the air. They neighed uneasily and began to get anxious. Hitting the horse fence. The low, hoarse roar revealed the anger and impatience in its owner's heart. His bloody mouth opened and closed, and the stable in front of him was instantly crushed into pieces. Even a horse in the stable was torn apart from its waist. Facing the monster that was already going berserk in front of him, Su Tong looked indifferent, fired, reloaded, and continued to shoot. Seeing the thing getting closer and closer to him, Su Tong suddenly took out something from the prop book, pulled the tab on it, and threw it into the monster's mouth. The monster didn't recognize the thing, so he swallowed it in one gulp. He looked at the round thing that fell to his hand and rolled his eyes. The woman took it in her hand, looked at it in confusion, and then looked at Su Tong. I saw Su Tong grinning at him and waving his hands, "Bye." After saying that, he turned around. Boom. The hot shockwave blew Su Tong's hair flying, followed by large pieces of minced meat, which fell from the air like a rain of blood. But Su Tong just opened his hand, a black umbrella was already on top of his head, looked at the broken meat at his feet, and curled his lips. Monster? Nothing more than that. Boom. At this time, someone didn't know what hit the umbrella, and it rolled down along the umbrella. Su Tong quickly grabbed the thing in his hand. It was a dark green bead that looked neither big nor small, about the size of a baby's fist. At first, Su Tong thought it was an eyeball, but when he took a closer look, he found that the texture of the object was like jade. He casually threw it into the prop book. As a result, the prop book was full of question marks. Obviously this thing needs to be appraised for use. The three thieves of Dia hid in the entrance of the hall and watched. They only heard Ji Xiang say, "Master, this thing looks delicious." Apparently since they tasted the delicious elixir last time, they have become familiar with its taste. They thought that if this thing survived the explosion intact, it might be the inner elixir of the monster. Su Tong glanced at the three of them angrily. "I don't do anything all day long, so I just eat. Just wait." Although Su Tong was a little tempted in his heart and wanted to try whether his precious fairy furnace could process this thing, but it was not the right time right now and he could only wait until he could survive the situation first. When Su Tong hurried to the front yard, he saw Li 11 covered in blood. He was holding a shining golden stick and beat the doll-like monster in front of him to pieces in 3 or 2 strokes. Oddly enough, the stick looked shiny and golden. Once it hit these little monsters, golden sparks immediately ignited. As soon as they were illuminated by the light of the sparks, these things immediately stopped moving, allowing Li 11 to attack them. His skull was shattered. However, after all, Li 11 fought alone and was injured. Although he solved all these little things after many setbacks, he was also exhausted. He fell to the ground with a pale face and looked at Su Tong with despair. Su Tong hurriedly came over and first looked at the door behind Li 11. Although Yang Gongjing was hiding behind the door, he could see through the Minjian Kimen that the aura fluctuations on Yang Gongjing's body were normal, and he couldn't help but feel he breathed a sigh of relief. Looking at Li 11 again, he frowned again. He stepped forward and carefully inspected Li 11's wound. "No need to look, my injury is too serious. Mr. Ma, since you said I am like your friend, can you do me a favor?" Li 11 knew in his heart that his injuries were so serious that even the palace doctor would not be able to help. He did not expect that after hiding in Tibet for so many years, he would eventually die in this barren mountain. Su Tong hummed lightly and tore Li 11's clothes casually. Looking at the big tear on his lower back, he took out a first aid kit from the prop book that had been gathering dust for a long time. This first aid kit was obtained from the 9-person book. Su Tong has never used it, but it just came in handy today. There are temporary hemostatic drugs in the box, as well as professional medical equipment. In his hands, this first aid box is simply pediatrics. Li 11 didn't know what Su Tong was doing, he just felt something pricked him, and his whole body felt numb immediately, and the wound was not so painful. Maybe this is the feeling of death. Li 11 thought that this was not bad, and it would not hurt so much when he died. He raised his head and looked at the starry sky above his head, and began to talk to himself. I have no other ideas. Please help me bury it under a peach tree, preferably a peach sapling that is about 1 or 2 years old. Why? Su Tong skillfully picked up the scissors and began to cut open Li 11's clothes and carefully cleaned his wounds. The whole process was concise and neat, without any sloppiness. Cleaning, stopping bleeding, applying medicine, and suturing, the whole process is incredibly fast. Oh, there are no suture tools in the first aid kit, but something like a stapler. This thing is called a skin stapler. It is actually more suitable for small wounds, but for the time being it can still be used for a while. Li 11 didn't realize that the bleeding from his wound had stopped, and his mind was still thinking wildly. He thought of the man who brought him to Mission Sect. It rained, so he stood behind him and held up an umbrella for himself. When it got cold, he put the only cotton robe he had on himself. When he raised his head, he could always see that gentle face, as warm and kind as a loving father, which made him feel warm in his heart every time he thought of it. As he thought about it, the corners of Li 11's eyes couldn't stop getting wet. I once heard people say that if a person commits evil in this life, he will always pay it back in the next life. I wonder if he will encounter that person by chance in a few years. A peach tree, just pick a peach to quench your thirst. Li 11 actually had the second half of what he said, but he didn't say it out. At this time, Su Tong tilted his head and looked back at him. Don't be stupid, you're lying. Lord Hell doesn't have the time to listen to your story. As he spoke, Su Tong tied the morphine on Li 11's thigh and clapped his hands. It's done. What's done? Li 11 looked at Su Tong blankly and saw Su Tong pointing at his wound. The conditions are limited, just treat it briefly. Just be careful and don't let the wound collapse. Ah! Li 11 was startled when he heard this. He pushed himself up and took a closer look. Sure enough, the wounds on his body were actually sewn shut. He couldn't help but be shocked. You know how to heal. Won't. Su Tong decisively shook his head in denial, pointed to the box next to him and said, I was wandering around in the foreign area before, and the things sold by foreigners were said to be fools' medical boxes, which means boxes that can save even a fool's life. I thought it was fun and gave it to him. I bought it, it's not expensive, 800 taels of silver. Li 11 lost consciousness for a while after hearing this. He didn't know whether he was thinking that his miserable life might not even be worth 800 taels, or that there were such magical treasures among foreigners. After a while, Li 11 finally seemed to realize that he had narrowly escaped death. He suddenly felt mixed feelings in his heart and glanced at the box. Such a strange thing, Master, bring it to save me. Li 11 said in his heart that he was not moved. It was a lie. He knew his current status, let alone 800 taels, 80 taels were not worth it. There were so many young eunuchs in the Forbidden City, and they were all buried in a hurry, no one knew. Hey, we brothers hit it off as soon as we met. Why are you so pretentious? If it's just a plaything, what's the big deal? That's a good point. I have a vast land and abundant resources, and there are countless divine objects. Why should I admire Western playthings? I don't know. When Yang Gongjing walked out of the door. She had obviously heard what Su Tong said just now, and she was not suspicious. After all, there were too many messy heresies in the West, and he had no intention of paying attention to them. Yang Gongjing didn't even look at Li 11, and casually picked up the golden stick in MaleProtagonist's hand. She said regretfully with a slightly painful expression, "It's a pity that after using this, it will be gone in 2 hours. It has lost its medicinal properties. Hey, what a pity." After saying that, he threw the stick aside and asked Su Tong what happened behind the explosion. Su Tong still blamed the problem on foreigners, saying that it was a gadget invented by foreigners. He gave it a try, and who would have thought that it would work wonders. Yang Gongjing's face suddenly became unhappy. They are all some weird tricks, heresy, and methods that cannot be put on the table. Use them as little as possible in the future. Su Tong was stunned for a moment when he heard this, thinking that this old guy had an outbreak of dementia. But he was so quick-witted, thinking that if you said that, I would be rude. He immediately turned his face solemn and said with a slightly unhappy look, "Master Yang has extraordinary means, but I can't do anything in literature or martial arts. No, relying on these strange and obscene skills, I'm afraid, he would have died a long time ago." His voice became softer and softer as he spoke, and the lingering resentment in his words was like silver needles, stimulating Yang Gongjing's nerves, but Ma Hongwen's words were not unreasonable. After thinking for a moment, Yang Gongjing raised his brows and glanced at the rotten meat on the ground. "Humph, that's just a lack of knowledge. This thing is called Sangha. It was originally the result of the resentment accumulated by pregnant women who died of dystocia, and then they drank it by chance. Some kind of yin treasure has become what you see now. To deal with this thing, just a soak of boy's urine can severely damage its vitality." Su Tong rolled his eyes inwardly. "You speak as if you are a boy, bah, shameless." Seeing Su Tong's suddenly enlightened look, Yang Gongjing grinned and said, "Well, speaking of it, you are also a student of my good friend. Since you are following me on errands, I won't treat you badly. From now on, you can stay with me whenever you have time. I'll teach you some self-defense skills so that you won't be as ignorant as those new schools of thought." This is what Su Tong was waiting for. When he heard this, he was overjoyed and nodded repeatedly to express his willingness. MaleProtagonist looked at it and said in his heart that he was not envious. It was a lie. Yang Gongjing was the deputy supervisor of Kintian prison. Although his ability was a bit poor, but he is also famous for his profound knowledge, and even if he wants to become a disciple, he is not qualified. He didn't expect Ma Hongwen, a dandy. Hey, no, MaleProtagonist suddenly thought of this master's methods just now. He couldn't help but take a deep breath. After changing his mentality, he suddenly felt that this master Ma was brave and resourceful, and it was not a bad idea. A good backer. "Sir, now that Foreman Zhou and the others are dead, our mission." Su Tong looked at the corpses on the ground and looked at Yang Gongjing. Yang Gongjing sighed and took out a bamboo tube from her sleeve. "I didn't want to use it so soon, but now it seems that I have to use it." After saying that, Yang Gongjing twisted the mechanism under the bamboo tube. Whoosh, with a sound, an arrow flew into the air and exploded overhead.